Lesman Paredes might just be the best athlete in weightlifting. He's extremely muscular, he can jump exceptionally high, and he's unbeaten for 6 straight competitions.
That's a much better pull.
Beautiful.
But how does he do it? How does he train to remain undefeated? And how come he looks so damn jacked? Let's take a look into his career, his world record-setting lifts, and try to tease out some of the key aspects of his training that differentiate him from the rest and have made him the most dominant 96 kilo weightlifter in the world.
This is a 26 kilogram jump. This is remarkable. Not hard.
Oh my word.
Not hard at all.
That is.
This episode is brought to you by WEIGHTLIFTING.ai. Get your individualized weightlifting program for free with code 2weektrial. Let me take you back to the 2021 World Championships, the first time I really took notice of Lesman Paredes, and probably the first time many of you had ever even heard of him. The 96 kilo category was filled with beasts, including the Olympic champion Miso Osona. If you'd asked me a month earlier, the idea of Lesman Paredes actually winning this World Championship seemed extremely unlikely, perhaps even comical. And yet a week out from competition, I'd noticed him training near Kedemar Vayanir. I wasn't even really looking to film Lesman, but when I noticed that he, a snatch specialist, was building up to over 200 kilos in the clean and jerk, I took some notice. He also went on to perform side bends, an exercise I haven't actually seen done a whole lot in weightlifting before, but something that I've now seen Lesman do after probably half of the 10 to 15 workouts I've filmed of him, along with more other direct abdominal work. I'm not saying that's what makes him so good, but I reckon he's doing it for a reason. Plus, in this video, I want to tease out some of the things that separate him from the rest. So when the day of competition came, I headed up to film the 96s, and figured I would go with focusing mainly on Lesman. This decision to some degree came because I noticed that while the others were up at 80%, he was still jogging, vibing out, a certain confidence that I couldn't miss. And then as he built up, he looked better than everyone I'd probably ever seen in the snatch. He also did something I'd only ever noticed one other person do prior to a heavy snatch, Lasha Talakadze. He muscle snatched pretty heavy too, up to 115 kilos. This, I would later discover, would provide a key metric and act as a strategy for Lesman. We'll unpack that shortly. He was having too much fun, powering weights that other athletes would be taking deep breaths before approaching. And then, he opened with 180 kilos, the heaviest opener ever in that category. That was the win.
Oh my god.
Then on to 187 kilos, a world record. And that's when everybody started taking notice. Lesman Paredes had truly announced himself onto the scene as one of the absolute best snatchers in the world. And after making a 213 kilo clean and jerk, he was indeed crowned a world champion. And so it was there that I began taking a keen interest in Lesman's career, as did many of us, especially when news broke that the Colombian world champion would now take his talents to Bahrain, where he and his now teammate, the Armenian-born Bahraini Ghor Minassian, would head up a strong Asian team. So I flew to Bahrain for the Asian Championships. While in Bahrain, I filmed all of Lesman's training, and I started noticing some interesting themes. I also spent a lot of time with his coach, Andrea, talking about his training. Let's take a look at the highlights from Lesman's snatch workouts. In Bahrain, he muscle snatched 115 kilos for a double, after which he built up to a 160 kilo snatch double, just like he did prior to becoming world champion 10 months earlier. A week later, he again muscle snatched, but this time he went heavier in the snatch, up to 170 kilos. 2 days later in the competition, he did the same thing, building up again to 115 kilos in the muscle snatch, granted slightly harder, before taking an easy win in the snatch with 182 kilos on his second attempt, not even bothering with his third, despite making 400 pounds look near effortless. At the World Championships in 2022, just a few months after this, the competition in which he hoped to become world champion again, we saw him build up to a massive 175 kilo snatch in training, with a 115 kilo muscle snatch double beforehand. In fact, I'll just let that session play for a while so you can see his jumps and progressions. Lesman uses the muscle snatch prior to a heavy snatch session for a few reasons. The first is because it acts as a primer, i.e. it primes him, or in other words, overemphasizes portions of the full exercise, the snatch, without fatiguing him much, i.e. it focuses him on producing as much force as possible as the bar passes his hips with his legs, as well as synchronizing the roll of the arms after extension. But it also does one other crucial thing. It acts as a gauge for him to work out how powerful he is feeling that day. And that's where the genius of the whole strategy lies. The reason he always stuck with 115 kilos or 253 pounds was so that he could become familiar with how that weight could feel on a day where he was ready to hit a big lift. A 115 kilo muscle snatch requires a certain amount of speed through the pull to make the lift without grinding the rep out overhead. Sometimes the 115 kilos would move slow and he wouldn't go as heavy in the snatch afterwards. Other times it would move quicker and he'd capitalize on that. It was a proxy for how much could he snatch without having to find out himself. The fastest it ever moved that I saw was at the training hall at the World Championships in 2022, and that's where he hit the heaviest training hall snatch I've ever seen from him. It's almost like a form of auto-regulation that occurs prior to the training session. He gets a good idea early on of how much force he's producing, and therefore makes decisions as to what sort of weight he's going to work up to. Some athletes do it with a jump test, others with velocity trackers at a certain weight, others with questionnaires relating to how they feel. And that leads me onto the sponsor of today's episode, WEIGHTLIFTIng.ai. When Max Ater and Weightlifting House came together to create the greatest programming system available, we wanted the programming to take into account how our athletes were feeling, kind of like how Lesman does with the muscle snatching. We created two ways of doing that. With each training session, you can answer questions relating to your tiredness, soreness, diet, sleep, things that impact your training. The app tracks all of this information and does all sorts of clever things with it, like if you've had a few days of feeling great, you're more likely to get tested on a variation. On the other side of the coin, if you seem overly fatigued and are under-eating, the weights might decrease straight away. The second method is that you rate every set, and if the weights are flying and the technique looks good, then you might go up in weight on your next set. If the weights feel heavier than it should or your technique is off, the weight might decrease. Want to know what it's like? Try Weightlifting.ai for free with code 2weektrial. The link is below. Along with Lesman's muscle snatching, there are two other things worth mentioning about the way this great athlete trains that make him stand out from the international crowd, at least against those I've spent my professional career filming. The first is the training of the shoulders that he does. It's not often we see weightlifters performing direct shoulder exercises close to competition, but Lesman will regularly come in with the sole purpose of doing just this. 7 to 8 days out from competition, Lesman will train and only perform strict press and push press. But you can tell based on the way he looks that he does shoulder training pretty consistently throughout his training cycles. After Lee Dae-in, Lesman must have the most impressive shoulders in the sport from a purely aesthetic perspective. They both happen to be arguably the best snatchers in the world also. He works up to 110 kilos or 115 kilos in the strict press for a few reps and a few sets, which is damn impressive. I'm sure many of you watching have felt 115 kilos in one form or another, whether it was a snatch, a squat, or a deadlift, but we all know how heavy that feels, and the idea of strict pressing it for reps is impressive. He then builds up in the push press, up to as much as 150 kilos, also for reps. The second thing I've really noticed from Lesman is that he takes more days off in the build up to a competition than anyone else. There are days, sometimes 2 in a row, where he won't train. He won't even show up to the training hall. And then when he does, he also, more than most, takes his time warming up, well over 30 minutes before he touches the barbell. Bands, stretches, jogging, physical therapy. He prepares his body for the battle ahead. And my word, is there a battle ahead? After 6 undefeated competitions, Lesman will now compete in the heavier 102 kilo category, the Olympic category, at the upcoming World Championships against the likes of the Olympic champions Ruslan Nuruddinov and Miso Isona, as well as the highest ranked 102 in the world currently, Nagisa Adilatili from Kazakhstan. Ultimately, the momentum shown from Lesman Paredes is quite remarkable. He's risen to the top of the ranks with impressive speed and shows no real signs of slowing down. Is it the muscle snatches, the shoulder work, the days off that make him a champion and a tier above the rest? Honestly, probably not. He's absurdly talented, hardworking, and he would probably succeed in almost every circumstance. Please subscribe for more.